Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Moving property markers is a huge red flag. Breaking your sprinkler and not caring is downright disrespectful. Good fences make good neighbors. It isn't petty to protect your property from damage. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. I want to put up a garden fence to prevent my neighbor from mowing my lawn. I haven't done it yet, but I want to put up a garden fence on my side of the property line in order to prevent my neighbor from mowing my property. The reasons are, 1, my neighbor uses a large riding lawnmower to take care of their yard and often mows a portion of my yard in order to avoid items in their backyard, trailer parked right by but not on the property line, trampoline placed 6 inches from the line. 2, about a week ago they mowed and damaged one of my sprinkler heads. It didn't cause my yard to flood and I was able to fix it without having to replace it, but it was still annoying. I saw my neighbor do it, noticed that they did it, and move on. 3, they recently, within the last 12 months, moved in and we have waved and said hello to them, but they've ignored us. They're friendly with other people in the neighborhood, but seem to ignore us and the other neighbors who share a property line with them. 4, they tore out the property boundary stick between our house and theirs. There's a hole where it was, and I want to place something, anything, in that spot before the hole fills in. I want to separate out my assumptions because they're based on my observations, which may be different than what the neighbor's actually doing. 2 sides to each story and whatnot. First, I have a feeling they're trying to slowly encroach onto our property. They have the smallest lot and have it full of stuff, shed, trailer, trampoline, boat, etc., and we have the largest lot and keep it pretty empty. Secondly, they don't seem to respect our property since they damaged our sprinkler. Lastly, they haven't been very friendly to us, and I want to create a barrier between us and them. I'm not a large fence person. In fact, based on city rules, I can't fence a large portion of my yard. I've planted trees between us, but can't have them on the property line. I am allowed to place a small decorative garden fence. For reference, they're those 2 to 3 foot tall metal fences that can be hammered into the ground. They're 100% decorative. I want to place it on our property to prevent them from mowing our yard. I would plant shrubs and flowers next to it so it doesn't look stupid. I've told family and friends this idea, and they seem to be split on if I'm being a petty a-hole. And our second story. Called the cops on the construction guys my neighbor hired after they didn't move their van from my driveway. So I own a 2 under 1 roof house. If you live in a European country, you most likely know them well. The house comes with a small driveway on the side that only has enough space for 1 car and an exit area on the sidewalk where people are not allowed to park as you needed to, exit. Now my neighbor's having some work done in his house. Apparently there was a leak or something, not very relevant. Regardless, a bunch of construction dudes showed up with 2 large vans. Due to a lack of space in the street, they decided to park 1 van in my driveway exit. I figured, fair enough, I'll just tell them to move if I have to use my car. Well, I work in IT and there was an emergency at work which needed someone to physically go there and fix it, given you can't exactly have IT issues during these times, if you get the drift. Well, duty called, I went outside, told one of the construction dudes to move his van since I'll be using my car in 15 minutes, and went back inside to have a quick shower. 5 minutes later, van's still there. Go outside again, speak to another dude, informed him that I asked his coworker to move the van and that I needed it moved as I'll be going in a bit. I get properly dressed, have some food, long butt commute to work, brush my teeth, and go outside to leave. Lo and behold, van's still there. At this point, I'm pissed as I need to leave, march up to the same dude and tell him he has 2 minutes to move the GD truck or we have an issue. So he tells me they got some machine hooked up to it and can't move it till they're done. I tell them they didn't have it hooked up a minute ago, and I DGAF regardless, so move the van. He says no. So at this point, I grab my phone, call the non-emergency line, wait half an hour, which it's still not moved. Had to inform my boss it'll be a bit longer. Anyhow, they ended up having to move it straight away when the police arrived, got a telling off and a pretty big fine. I went to work, and all was well besides nasty looks from the construction douches and a livid neighbor. Thing is, according to my neighbor, one of the guys actually got fired over this, which I find hard to believe, and the construction company wants to charge him for the fine since apparently they're claiming he said they could park there, which I find hard to believe, and he denies it. Regardless, he's mad at me. And our last story. So my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme cost. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullcrap kind of guy who did this job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday, grumpy, older engineer who really knew his thing and always was ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he'd reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to a head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on a work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said, "Yes." "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols. And the company was aware of and had approved his side business, and he was on break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he'd brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare that he had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said that he had 2 job offers from competitors who looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted at twice the hourly rate he'd made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he'd managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with the management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week, HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision. But until then, he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. Then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they'd handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages: 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and, of course, the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an a-hole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department. When it came to bonus calculations and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big crap-eating grin and a, "What are you gonna do? Fire me?" Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.